Welcome to Coffee Time with Abcadeas. I'm your host, Abcadeas, and this is the show where I may take a sip out of my coffee here, but mainly I just rant about anything and everything that may interest me. First off, you may notice a bit of a different background today, and that is because I am back in my home. For the first couple videos I filmed, I was actually staying at my dad's house, babysitting his dog while he was in Cuba. So that's kind of why the background's changed up a bit. It's going to be this background and this location for the foreseeable future, unless something dramatic happens. But other than that, I really appreciate the response I've been getting so far to all the videos. The views have tapered off a little bit, but that's perfectly okay. Like, it seems like at least a dozen or so of you are continuing to tune in, and I really appreciate that. Yesterday's video was a bit of a different topic than usual, but it seems like you guys are still interested, so I'm definitely going to talk about more tech stuff, like as you can see behind me. I still do a bit of tech repair here and there, not that often. It's more so just with my job now. But there's a bunch of other topics. I'm Canadian, so there's a few issues in Canada that I want to talk about, particularly Bill C-21, the gun control legislation and the amendments that were repealed recently, as well as the state of our healthcare. But I want to get to all that stuff in another video. In today's video, I wanted to kind of follow up on two things here. The first one being a news story that's kind of the most prevalent thing right now, the Chinese balloon that I had made some initial comments on a couple days ago. And then secondly, I wanted to delve into a comment I got from a viewer, going back a bit to the whole Russia-Ukraine conflict, but kind of going into more of the specifics of the things I was talking about, kind of to back up what I was saying, more or less. But without any further ado, the Chinese balloon, I'm sure anybody who's watching this kind of program knows, Chinese balloon was shot down by the US. The Chinese issued not an official condemnation, but they issued some comments saying basically that they weren't happy about it. And it just seems like the general direction here is the US is either using this as an excuse or could be possibly responsible in some way, shape, or form for either the balloon's deployment itself, or perhaps it shifting off course, or it getting this far into America. You know, there's a lot of different possibilities there. But the first thing I wanted to actually point out here is former CIA Director John Brennan went on and had an interview with NBC, and it seems like there's kind of two competing narratives in the Western media. The main one coming out of like the US State Department is this is absolutely a Chinese government balloon. It is not a civilian balloon. It is absolutely for espionage purposes, and there is no possible way that it's an accident. And then you have the opposite of that, where other than the fact that it's a balloon from the Chinese government, you get kind of a countering narrative where, oh, well, it might have been set off course, and it does look like it's for meteorological. I'm mispronouncing that word, I know. There's some words that just don't sit right in my tongue with my very slight lisp and slight Canadianisms that end up basically just result in me butchering certain words. But yeah, there's that countering narrative that perhaps it just kind of got over here by accident, that it's for scientific purposes, it's not espionage or military purposes. And it seems like particularly the US is pushing the former, the first narrative, that it is a Chinese spy balloon, it is for espionage purposes, and John Brennan here goes on to kind of stipulate that the Chinese might have been doing it to provoke a response, perhaps as a response to the narrative coming out of the US and the US State Department over the last couple days, gearing up for war with Taiwan. That was his kind of speculation. I said stipulation instead of speculation in one of my last videos, and it kills me inside. Anyways, but that's his kind of speculation around it. At no point did he even entertain the idea of it being either civilian or scientific. It was under the assumption completely that it is Chinese military. To my knowledge, the Chinese have confirmed that it is their balloon, but they didn't confirm that it was a military balloon or if it was part of a scientific research endeavor or if it was in fact a meteorological balloon. And it gets kind of hazy because, like I said, the Communist Party of China does retain shares in every large corporation. So, and feasibly, any even private research firm that is conducting this kind of research most likely would have some shares in their company owned by the CPC. So technically, like, the government has involvement, but then there's also the possibility that it is a civilian balloon. I'm going to go over that actually in a minute here. But to my knowledge, the Chinese government hasn't confirmed, other than that it was for meteorological purposes. They haven't confirmed which department it came from or how exactly it got off course or what exactly it was doing there. They're under the assumption that Americans are reasonable and they can see this kind of equipment and stand to reason that it's not useful for any kind of intelligence gathering. And he even admits, John Bolton admits in this interview, that it wouldn't be really useful for espionage purposes. He goes on to try to say, well, China doesn't have 24-hour satellite coverage of the United States. I absolutely don't believe that. The way satellites orbit, you would think even having 50 of them, like, I'm just speculating here, but even having 50 satellites, say, orbiting just opposite of each other would be enough to give you 24-hour coverage. But once you start talking about hundreds and hundreds of satellites, I'm sure you're definitely there by that point, getting 24-hour coverage of the entire globe. But again, I don't build satellites. I don't know much about the inner workings of satellites, so I'm just speculating there. But it seems unreasonable that the Chinese would deploy such an obvious, such an arbitrary piece of equipment to conduct espionage when they have so much better equipment at their disposal. Like, it just doesn't add up to me. What John Brennan was going on to say, which I don't even know if he understands this himself, he was saying they might have been trying to map the technical / cyber environment of U.S. bases. So I guess he's trying to insinuate that this was some kind of packet intercepting device. Which, if you don't know what packets are, that's just how data gets carried through the internet. So is he trying to insinuate that that this was collecting and analyzing packets and MAC addresses and IP addresses to map out different pieces of equipment and different things on the ground around bases in America? And if so, I don't understand how the US hasn't secured their network to the point that any of that information would be arbitrary and useless anyways, and obscured and encrypted. I don't really get the line of reasoning there either. Like I said, he admits that balloons aren't a very effective espionage tool. Even the second guest on this section, like, that's the countering narrative here. He goes on to say it doesn't fit the pattern of Chinese diplomacy, like, especially over the past couple of years. China has really tried to work towards opening and maintaining relations with the U.S. And again, this comes right on the heels of Anthony Blinken's visit to Beijing, which was conveniently canceled, right? So it seems like if the U.S. is trying to provoke a war with Taiwan, which by all indications, it seems like they are, this would be a very good push towards that. Like, this balloon flying over America would be this very good rallying cry. Maybe not for U.S. institutions, because they're already there, but more so the U.S. people. Almost a Gulf of Tonkin incident, if you will. and it just doesn't make it doesn't make sense to me in any way, shape, or form. The host admits as well that the Chinese have been extremely forthcoming about this situation. They launched investigations right away. Nobody in this section even mentioned that the Chinese said it was a meteorological balloon. They're just completely ignoring that explanation. So I don't understand why there wouldn't be at least a breakdown of why it's likely not a meteorological balloon, or why they think it's not a meteorological balloon, or why they think the Chinese government is lying on this particular issue, other than, oh, China bad. I'm not here to defend China. I'm just here watching what could possibly be the equivalent of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand for World War III. I'm probably exaggerating it a little bit, but I feel like this might be the first event in a domino sequence of events that are going to lead us into direct conflict in the Taiwan Strait with China. Again, I know I said Taiwan in place of China in one of my second video, but I'm getting better at it. That's the issue with just ranting on. You kind of mince words sometimes, but I think that's most important for me, just to get these videos out and to try to get them out on a daily basis. I'm able to rant on like this, and it seems like at least, like I said, a dozen of you seem to enjoy it. I'm up to 35 or so subscribers, so thank you so much again, everybody. But back to what I was saying. The next piece of Western media I kind of want to go to is this article in the BBC here. Ooh, I accidentally zoomed in too much. This article in the BBC talking about the effect that this balloon has had on China-US relations. So, well, I'd encourage you to read the whole article. I'll have links below, of course. This article goes on to question and mention as well that the Chinese were excited for Blinken's visit, so it doesn't seem reasonable that they would intentionally fly this balloon and try to provoke relations or to provoke the U.S. in some way. But the article goes on to say, make no mistake, Chinese President Xi Jinping had great hopes for the visit and was reportedly even going to meet Mr. Blinken himself. So what balloon gathered intelligence could be so good that it was worth scoopering this process? I don't know, scuppering? I don't know what that word is. The short answer is none, which is why many analysts think that even if it was to some extent spying, the deployment of this balloon in this way at this time had to have been an error on the Chinese side. So this is the first piece of Western media that I've seen even subtly admit that it could have been a civilian craft, or it could have been a scientific craft, that it might not have necessarily been espionage. It seems like the narrative across the West that it was absolutely for espionage. It just might have been an accident. So they're making sure that the American public are going to be mad about this, but not too mad. And an interesting factoid, I can probably verify this, cost of AM6 missile, but I saw, okay, yeah, so, right here, I'll probably just show you the Google search result, because I don't want to siphon through this Wikipedia article right now. But the missile that was used to shoot down this balloon cost the U.S. $380,000. And again, with that big price markup issue I was talking about in my previous video, I'm sure that was maybe a $50,000 missile. But even considering that, when you look at, say, right here, I've seen this posting quite a few times now. You can buy a balloon that looks exactly the same, that was most likely, if not the same balloon that was used, right? The same type, make, model, that kind of ordeal. If not, it was at least of a similar type. Here, it's going for, I believe, 26 to 118 Chinese yuan, which is about equivalent to 17 US dollars. So You're telling me Chinese government has $1 million satellites that are worth tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they're using a $20 balloon, radar balloon, to do their espionage? It's possible, but it seems like the least likely explanation of everything we have in front of us. And the only reason that the US would be pushing so hard in this direction is if they wanted to go to war with China. And that seems to be corroborated with the general narrative that has been coming out of the United States, at least for the past couple weeks, if not for the past decade or more. I think at this point, this saga, this issue, this debacle is over. It's resolved. I'm sure the Chinese will hold some resentment, and it's more of an indication to the Chinese that they need to continue to prepare themselves for war with America. I hit my microphone there. But I think for now, this has pretty much resolved itself. The Americans have shot it down, apparently in waters that are too deep for them to recover it. So they can't even recover it and verify what the balloon actually was or what data it was actually collecting. So they get to speculate all day. And I don't understand. If it came from China, it most likely would have had to fly over South Korea, Japan, and Western Canada. And now there's been a bit of a to-do in Canada about Canada not alerting the United States of the balloon. But that goes under the assumption that the balloon wasn't launched in Canada in the first place. And that, that the Chinese government were the ones that actually launched the balloon. I'm sure, say, for example, I know TaoBao, you do need to have a Chinese citizenship to actually log in and use TaoBao. It's basically their equivalent to Amazon. Well, really, they're equivalent to Alibaba, I believe. Like, it's more directly connected to the factory. But obviously, Alibaba is for international use, countries trying to buy things out of China. But anyways, I'm pretty sure if a U.S. official or the CIA or even a U.S. police officer that woke up in a bad mood one day really wanted to get their hands on this particular craft, they could. And if they wanted to walk into Canada or drive into Canada and launch the balloon, they could. And if it was of Chinese origin, Chinese manufacture, and the Chinese see the balloon, they aren't sure of its origins or where it's coming from, I'm sure they would just admit, under the assumption that because TaoBao is only internally available in China, to my knowledge, I believe if you're a Chinese citizen living abroad, you can order things abroad. But I believe the Chinese were under the assumption that most likely it is their balloon and they should just own up to it, and that would be the best direction to go. But still, with that, there is even a possibility that it was still launched in the US, or not in the US, in Canada. I'm not saying how likely that possibility is, but of course, Western media aren't going to go over the possibilities that would make their own government look bad. So that's why I'm here to do it for them. Clear my throat a little bit there. But I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say about that particular topic. Next, I wanted to move on to the comment I got on my second video. So not my most recent, but the one right before that. And I did have it pulled up, but I accidentally closed Edge, and that is the one thing I missed. Alright, so let's take a look at the comment. Alright. Russia economy is about the size of the state of Maryland's. Give me a break. I'm just gonna actually debunk that really quick. $364 billion is the estimated gross domestic product of Maryland. 7.9 trillion is the estimated gross domestic product of Russia. And now, I'm sure your point is that it pales in comparison to the GDP of the United States, which, yes, is correct. But what you're saying here is, it is verifiably false with simple Google searches. So, I mean, again, usually to these kind of comments, I would just say something to the tune of, war is war and time will tell. But I think it gives me a perfect chance to go over some of the specifics of some of the claims I was making earlier. But back to the second part of his question here. Of his comment, sorry. He says, question. How will we know when our enemies have a weapon we can't combat and they believe they can kill all of us with? Answer. They will attack. Okay. This is American projectionalism, I want to say, or projectionism. I'm not sure the right way to conjugate that. But basically the practice of Americans kind of projecting what their country would do onto other countries. So the Americans say, well, if we had a weapon that could kill all of our enemies, we would use it. So clearly, if the Russians had a weapon that could kill all of their enemies, they would use it too. And what is absolutely great about that particular claim is this right here, is the Russian Sarmat. So I'm not going to get a lot of these specifics right, so I'm just kind of going to give you a broad overview, and feel free to look into it for yourself. But the Russian Sarmat is basically one of the newest Russian nuclear warheads. Its payload is about 15 times more powerful than that of the most powerful American nuclear missile. The Americans don't have anything that even comes close to the actual, I think it's kiloton rating of this bomb. Second, it's hypersonic, so it can't be detected basically until 2 or 3 minutes before it hits the ground. And the Russians are steadily manufacturing and deploying these all over their country. Right there. Right there. That's not even conspiracy. You can look at the most powerful missile the US has versus the Sarmat. It pales in comparison to what the Russian Sarmat is. So the Russians arguably even have a missile that they would have close to first strike capability. First strike capability meaning that they could hit the US without the US hitting them back. The only thing that would counter that the US has are nuclear submarines. And that's what keeps them in check. But your assertion that if the Russians had a weapon that could kill all of you, that you would be dead, it's not necessarily the truth. But I wanted to go more specifically into my claim that Russian industrial, particularly military industrial production, is significantly higher than that of the United States. And in comparison, the United States pales to Russia's military production. So the first thing I wanted to point out is 2 graphs from Statista here, which is just kind of an overall GDP breakdown of the United States compared to Russia, of what their GDP actually comes from. So obviously, Russia has 1/10 the GDP of the United States. That is absolutely correct. I know that's not what you were saying, but this kind of the point you probably should have made if you're trying to make the argument that I think you're trying to make, which is, well, no shit, the U.S. outpaces Russia in industrial production. What the fuck are you talking about? So I think that's the point you're trying to make, so that's what I'm countering. So we look at the U.S. economy in 2019, 77% of the American economy was service-based. So service-based being things like insurance, stocks, loans, government bonds, futures, cryptocurrency, I'm sure, is kind of mingled in there a bit. Basically, everything you could imagine that are made up funny numbers that just only exist in a computer database somewhere, and then add in stuff like Uber and restaurants and services, basically things humans have to do for other humans in some way, shape, or form. Obviously, those service-based facets of the economy are completely reliant on having a healthy economy, having enough consumers with enough buying power to spend excess income on frivolous items or luxury goods per se. I don't mean frivolous as in, oh, you dirty capitalist pigs, how dare you? Like, I get it. I eat McDonald's too. Like, I'm not trying to poop on that at all. But the actual industry of the United States only makes up 18% of their economy. So less than 20% of their economy. And I don't know, I really tried with this. It took me 30 minutes to find a breakdown that was the same between Russia and the United States so I could directly compare them. The breakdowns I kept finding were GDP breakdown by industry, but you add up the percentages that it shows, and it was only like 25% total. So that didn't make any sense to me. I hopped back and forth between a million websites. This is the only thing I could find that was the same on the same website for both Russia and the United States. So we look at Russia's economy now. And significantly more of it is industry-based. Almost twice as much is industry-based. And that's as of 2021. So that's not after the mobilization in 2022, which was not only a military mobilization of military-aged, military-experienced men and women, but it was also a mobilization of Russian industry. And as I was talking about in Dylan Daniels' video entitled Millennials, I'll have it down below, while Putin isn't per se a general secretary, he took on much the same role that a general secretary of a communist party during war would. And keep in mind that that's much the same as presidents of the United States would. Like, in many ways, general secretaries of communist parties have the same powers on paper as the president, and in some cases even less, actually, because sometimes those powers are split up amongst the Politburo, the Central Committee, those kind of things. But Putin has taken on a role being directly involved in industry and directly overseeing industry that is particularly needed for the conflict in Ukraine and the potential on incoming conflict with the United States, which I'm kind of more on the fence about now that is a possibility given what I talked about before, the amount of troops we're looking at in each that each country has. Like, it's just an insurmountable difference for the United States to make up. But even aside from that, so just looking at numbers and speculating, that's not really going to get us anywhere, right? So I wanted to flip to this article from the New York Times that I just paid $2 a month to have a subscription to. Thank you, paywalled mainstream media. Like, if your media and your journalism is going to be garbage, at least make it free. Like, put a bunch of ads everywhere. I don't give a shit, but don't make me pay for it. Like, whatever. I'm using it as a source, so I shouldn't call it shitty journalism, but generally the New York Times is an absolute pile of steaming hot trash. But the New York Times, even an outlet that would be the most favorable to Ukraine, goes into the artillery production of the U.S. compared to Russia. So goes on to say, they might not actually say Russia's shell production. No, I don't think it does. But they say basically they can produce 14,000 shells a month, which is almost 200,000, right? And they're going to increase that 500%, they're saying. So they wanted to get up to 90,000 or more shells by next January. I don't know if the U.S. has the skilled workforce and the industrial capacity really to ramp up production that quickly in that amount of time, but I'm sure economists much smarter than I could break that down on how feasible that is or not. But this article from The Drive, which I'm not sure exactly what this outlet is, this goes into tank production. Okay, so how many tanks? Okay, so these are both about tanks. Again, the issue with ranting on, you can't remember exactly what you found where. But in this particular article, then, it should go on to say, write down stripes. It's actually this one. I knew it was a second article. I knew there was a claim in the New York Times article, and they didn't follow it up with a claim from the Russian side of production. Okay, perfect. Right here. This is what I wanted. Said, so the U.S. Army is going to increase its production to 20,000 shells a month by the spring. So that means like this spring, 40,000 per month by 2025. So this is estimating that it's going to take 2 years for the U.S. to get up to 40,000. Ukrainians use about 100,000 shells per month. Russia's forces have been firing an average of 20,000 artillery shells per day. So that was exactly what I was saying. This is actually a little higher than what I was saying. But obviously those claims are coming out of Ukrainian outlets with a very pro-Ukrainian tinge. The numbers I got, I believe I found them from a BBC article, but the point still stands. Russia is outpacing Ukraine in artillery, at least firing artillery, very significantly. And then the article goes on to say, outside estimates of the state of Russia's artillery stocks vary widely, which is true, but the head of Estonia's Defense Intelligence Center estimated that Russia still has 10 million artillery shells in stock and was producing them at a rate of 3.4 million a year. The exact numbers I gave. Russia is outpacing the US significantly in artillery shell production. Regardless of how big their economy is on paper, they are outpacing the US in shell production. And then we look at a second thing here. We look at tank production. So we have the Abrams main battle tank, and then you have Russia's T-90M. I believe I called it a T-92, which was my mistake. It is T-90M is their main battle tank. But this website is saying that on an estimate, the United States can churn out about 15 Abrams tanks a month. Whereas Russia, even according to the Kiev Post, so clearly a very pro-Ukrainian source. They have no reason to embellish the numbers, but they're able to manufacture 20 to 30 modern T-90M main battle tanks in a month. So even according to this very skewed outlet, Russia is at about double the production of the United States. I'm sure it is significantly more than that as well, because this is also talking, I believe this is only talking about one particular tank manufacturing factory, but still, like, I don't know where you're coming from on this, but I'm coming from a place of someone that has been watching this conflict really on and off for the last 8-9 years, but that got particularly interested once it escalated in February 2022. Very specific with my language there, because this conflict has been going on for 9 years, since the Maidan coup and since the Kiev regime has been shelling the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, despite the Minsk II peace agreements that should have saw those two regions gain some kind of autonomous status but stay inside of Ukraine, but instead they were just shelled as the Ukrainian regime wanted to continue their policies of banning the Russian language, Russian religion, Russian history from all of Ukraine, and they wanted Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian nationalism to be what they envisioned it to be. They didn't care what people in certain regions that may identify more closely with the Russians or the Tatars or the different ethnic groups that you find in Ukraine, a very culturally diverse part of the world. The people in the West, in Galicia, the people backing Zelensky, part of the Azov battalion, part of the OUN, part of the other far-right organizations you find in Ukraine, which there are plenty, they didn't want Ukrainian nationalism to be anything other than what they envisioned it to be. And that's what really got us here today. I'm not here to do a breakdown of why this conflict started. I'm sure if you're watching something like this, you have at least a bit of context. But if you don't, and you would like to hear a breakdown from me, I did a bit of one in that video with Dillion Daniels entitled Millennials. That will be down below. So again, do go watch that. And I have a bunch of topics I want to cover, a bunch of things I want to go into. But if you notice any news story or you're kind of curious about something, either tech related, China, Russia, US, Canada related, Europe related even, I don't know too much about Europe. I know more world history of Europe, 1945 and before, and I know a bit about EU and NATO expansion, that kind of thing, but in terms of culturally or politically in Europe, I don't really have as much of a grasp as I do with Canada, US, Russia, and China. Maybe in Britain a little bit, with the revolving door of prime ministers. I've been keeping up with that saga a little bit, but anything you're interested in that you think you want to hear me talk about, shoot it my way, and I'll do a bit of research, or if I already know about it, I'll just turn on the camera and rant and take a sip or two of my coffee with my Duran mug here. One of the other things I wanted to say is I'm really making an effort, although I take a lot of inspiration from Alexander Makuris and his style of just being able to record a video and put it out, as well as Mudahar at Some Ordinary Gamers. Basically his videos look just like that, or just like this. I'm taking inspiration from those two fellas in particular. I'm really trying to make a point to either cover things or cover things in a different way and give it a bit of different analysis, even if I am covering a topic that Alex has already covered. I'm making sure that I'm taking information from a multitude of sources and building an opinion that is unique from his. So I think I'm doing a pretty okay job of that. And that's why I kind of want to get into other topics that you typically don't see covered in a lot of these political talk shows. Never really have a breather. It's just all politics all the time. Very, very similar kind of pace, structure. But I want to talk about things like the most recent GoldenEye remaster. I was particularly interested in that. I'm actually pretty satisfied with that. And that's going to be a controversial opinion, so I want to get that out there, but I want to see if I can't record some footage somehow. But nonetheless, thank you so much for paying attention and watching this far. Again, I'll make sure all my sources, everything I showed here today, will be linked down in the comment section below. If you have any questions, anything you disagree with me on, feel free, leave it down in the comments. Shoot me a DM if you have me on any platform. I'll try to, as well, to post a link to my TikTok down below. I do content over there, not really any quality, but I do content over there. But other than that, thank you for watching and have a gooder.